attention. Hemophiliacs have a serious blood disorder. They lack the agent needed to clot their blood and stop internal bleeding. In the early 70s, a new treatment was developed that overnight more than doubled their lifespan. But by the early 80s, it became apparent that what was called a miracle was actually a death sentence. Now they want justice. 9-year-old Cubby DePrince knew he was dying of AIDS.
Going to heaven is like just a second life. I wouldn't have AIDS. I wouldn't have any kind of disease.
Cubby, who was a hemophiliac, died 2 years ago. His family says he contracted AIDS from the contaminated blood clotting factor that was supposed to keep him alive.
But he never lost his spunk and his spirit.
For Elaine, who adopted 3 boys with hemophilia, her tragedy didn't end with Cubby. Her son Mike also died of AIDS 9 months later.
They wanted to know why and how. And I explained to them that good people who donated blood so that their blood would clot didn't know they had HIV.
But all the explanations didn't seem to help. There are still few answers for her youngest son, Teddy, who at 15 also has AIDS.
It's sort of scary that I know all this information that a normal kid my age would not know. Like, I shouldn't have to know this stuff because I contracted this HIV from my products.
Unfortunately, the DePrinces are not alone. According to the National Hemophilia Foundation, 90% of all severe hemophiliacs born before 1985 have either died of AIDS or are now HIV positive. Many hemophiliacs are not only fighting right now for their lives and lives lost, they're fighting for justice.
Committee will come to order.
It's the contention of the hemophiliac community that U.S. manufacturers were aware of a treatment formula which would ensure that the clotting factor would not be HIV infected.
In the state of New Jersey, Elaine DePrince and other hemophiliacs like Dan Reich are fighting for compensation from drug companies they contend knew the factor was contaminated. Who do you blame?
The pharmaceutical companies. The fraction is the blood product.
Why? Did they know that the blood was contaminated?
Yes, they knew.
So for years and years and years, even though they knew of the risk, they had the data to show it was a problem, the product was going out into the marketplace, virally infected and causing a disease. And so by the time the AIDS virus struck and was appreciated in the very late 70s and early 80s, it was already too late.
For Dan and the DePrinces, that's what's hardest to take. They believe blood manufacturers knew hepatitis contaminated the product in the 70s and 80s and opted to do nothing about it. If they had cleaned it up, they say, it would have inadvertently killed the AIDS virus. Dr. Thomas Dries was the head of blood products for one of the companies that made Factor from 1973 to 84.
It was sort of accepted by the hemophiliacs, I think, and by the companies as well, that since it took 20, 30, 40 years to die from hepatitis, that they were willing to put up with that. In other words, on a cost-risk basis.
Dr. Dries, who was fired, now testifies as an expert witness for hemophiliacs in court cases. He says the decision not to clean up the factor was strictly a matter of economics. It would have meant destroying a large inventory of blood.
Let's say you're making material up to this date and you have inventory here, and then you've got heat treatment or whatever. What do you do with this stuff that's on the shelf? Everybody shipped it.
Dr. Dries also claims there were deliberate attempts to bypass the FDA.
The blood industry got together and said, here's what we're going to tell them tomorrow. We're going to tell them it's not proven yet, and we ought to do a study, and that study will be a delaying tactic.
Elaine DePrince now wants the statute of limitations waived so she and others can file a lawsuit.
I don't want another mother to go through what I've gone through. I've gone through hell. I can't even describe what it's like to lose 2 children in 9 months.
The New Jersey legislature backed the bill Elaine was fighting for, but not the governor.
That bill was not going to stand a constitutional test. There just wasn't any question about it, and it was going to give false hope In fact, what we've done is give the hemophiliacs that have contracted AIDS more time. They've actually get 2 years under the changes that we made to the bill.
The bill's sponsor, Senator John Lynch.
And now they want to use that same deep pocket money that they made from these victims and from the publics to defend themselves by not allowing the victims to have their day in court, by giving well-connected lobbyists big dollars to keep them from ever making it to the courtroom on the facts.
Dan Reich and the DePrinces now have one last chance. They're praying the legislature overrides the veto and allows them to sue the pharmaceutical companies once and for all.
They need to pay for the fact they put profits before people.
For Teddy, it's not just a fight for himself. It's a fight for the brothers he watched die.
We contacted the 4 companies that manufactured Factor. They refused our request for an interview. In the past, they have defended their actions, saying they did the best they could given the scientific knowledge at the time. Congress is considering legislation that would give limited compensation to victims. And next week, the New Jersey legislature will review Governor Whitman's veto. What happens there could set a precedent for the nation. We'll have more in a moment, but first, this is Today on NBC.